Good morning, everyone. It is April 21st, Thursday morning, and we have something phenomenal which will be taking place over the next couple of days. And I'm not referring to the storm system developing off in the Dakotas, or actually developing just to the west of that, pushing into South Dakota, which will be likely bringing perhaps a snowstorm of 6 to 12 inches for the second half of the weekend, a rain or ice storm, perhaps flooding as well for the first half of the weekend. We're not referring to that. We're referring to the dew points, to the humidity. Take a look at Nebraska for tomorrow. We have the dry line, which is situated somewhere in Nebraska from the eastern part of the state to the western part of the state. You have the dry line in between. We have dew points in North Platte, Nebraska, going down into the low to mid 20s for tomorrow afternoon, but dew points in the east part of Nebraska in the low to mid 60s, low 60s, perhaps mid 60s. So you wonder, how could temperatures in North Platte, Nebraska get into the 90s? Well, that's why. The air is so dry, the sun is super efficient at heating things up. In eastern Nebraska, we also might see temperatures very close to 90. What's going on in eastern Nebraska is a lot more impressive. Really, once you look at the dew point, it's a lot more impressive than what's going on in western Nebraska. You have dew points in the low 60s, and still temperatures are forecasted to make it very close to 90 degrees, even though dew points are 40 degrees higher in eastern Nebraska. That's something really phenomenal. You know, if you take a city in the summertime like St. Louis, Missouri, and you look at the days when it hit, let's say, 104 degrees, such as August 17th back in 2003, or 2004, I believe, you take a look at that and you'll see 2003, let's say, you take a look at that and you'll see how the dew point temperatures were in the 60s in the morning. Temperatures were whatever they were. And right before, or as the temperatures were going way up to 104, the dew points were dropping quickly, probably about 1 or 2 degrees per every degree Fahrenheit it went up. So perhaps even 2 degrees. So it's very significant. Dew point is a form of energy, just like temperature. So if the dew point drops, all that energy gets transferred into the temperature, and the temperature goes up. So you have a 40-degree difference in dew point. You would think there would be an enormous difference in temperature as well. You would think it would be something like what happens in Texas. Houston, Texas, you'll have highs in the mid-90s. Rio Grande Village, Texas, you have a high about 110 degrees, sometimes even hotter. You have a 15-degree difference between the two cities. One city is getting blasted with humidity off the Gulf of Mexico. And talk about being blasted with humidity. The real city that gets blasted with humidity is Galveston, Texas, and Corpus Christi, Texas. When it gets humid, those are really the humidity in those places is really top-notch in this country, even higher than South Florida. On the weather map tomorrow, even in Florida, dew points are only going to be around 60 degrees. That's until you enter the Miami area, then you start to approach 70 degrees. If you look at the Midwest, it's not just eastern Nebraska, the whole Midwest, even Louisiana, dew points in the low 60s. Low 60s, that's what it shows on the windy.com European computer model, whatever version of the European computer model that is, that's what it shows for the dew points for tomorrow. That thing tends to be pretty accurate. That's what I've noticed. So you have the dew points down there right around 60 degrees. I don't know why they're so low. Perhaps the water temperatures just haven't heated up yet, or maybe the wind flow is not really off the Gulf yet, although it will be so. But in any case, you have dew points in the low 60s by the Gulf states. Those dew points, the air moves north and the dew points remain in the low 60s, even by St. Louis, and it remains in the low 60s, even for eastern Nebraska. But actually, it's even a higher Madraka. We're holding on a higher level than that, because the dew points actually don't just remain in the low 60s. When you get north of St. Louis, the dew points actually start to rise into the mid 60s. You'll see dew points 66, 67 degrees. And it actually corresponds to the Corn Belt, the Midwest Corn Belt. Now, what's shocking to me, the big chiddush over here, what's the shakaroo? There's a tremendous shakaroo over here. Is there even corn this time of the year? Is there corn being grown in the fields yet? I don't know. I don't really know. In the summertime, this is a normal occurrence. If you have air off of the Gulf of Mexico affecting Iowa, the dew points are going to be highest in Iowa. In this country, dew points go way up. You have dew points. The only area you can get dew points in the 80s in this country, besides every now and then in Galveston, Texas, or, once in a while here and there on the Gulf Coast, is in Iowa. You'll get dew points well past 80 degrees sometimes. Like this past summer, a dew point hit 86 degrees in some city in Iowa. That's Persian Gulf stuff. This is Persian Gulf territory where the water temperatures in the Persian Gulf are in the mid-90s. So you have air blowing off of that water. You have dew points in the mid-80s. But the cornfields really push those dew points up because the cornfields are not restricted by water temperature, and therefore it can go up and up, and they transmit an enormous amount of moisture into the air. The question is, what about now? Are there cornfields right now? Why are the dew points higher in Iowa in places right around the Corn Belt, according to tomorrow's weather map? Why is that? So perhaps if there were cornfields, the dew points would be even higher. But maybe I don't know. I don't know why the dew points are higher, but you have dew points of 60 degrees, which will be going up even into Minnesota by the time you get to Shabbos. Now, the dew points start to drop in the St. Louis area by the time you reach Shabbos. Not big time, just slightly lower dew points in the upper 50s, and the East Coast never really makes it into the 60s, dew points in the 60s. For the East Coast, by the way, you have really warm weather coming to you for Friday. That's the weather that's over here in the Midwest, that's the weather here in the Midwest. In the Midwest, the pshat in this weather, the explanation in this weather, there's a strong question that someone could ask. A cold front just went through in the Chicago area, so why in the world is it 10 to 15 degrees warmer than it was yesterday? So one answer is that the cold air aloft temperatures, meteorologists love to measure temperatures at 5,000 feet above the surface because the computer models seem to have an accurate picture of that. That's what many of the National Weather Service forecast discussions, I've seen that before. But the problem is, how does that translate to surface temperatures? So when you have a strong sun like you do today, the ultraviolet index here in Chicago is a 7, powerful sun. So you're going to get temperatures which are going to go way up to 70 degrees, even warmer than that perhaps. And on the East Coast, that's what's headed to the East Coast tomorrow. If you should get a downslope wind in the Baltimore area, down those the Blue Ridge Mountains, you're going to get temperatures even warmer than whatever those computer models say. That happens sometimes. I've been there when that happened. When you have temperatures, they're forecast to be low 70s. I think it was a day in December, actually. If the winds come off the mountains in just the right way, for Baltimore, it has to be just the right way. The temperatures actually went up into the low 80s. So you see stuff like that. Anyways, then we have a little bit of a cool down for the East Coast on Shabbos. Not too bad, but the real warmth comes in on Sunday. Temperatures go well into the 80s for many locations, for especially Virginia, Washington, D.C., Baltimore. I think it's going to go into the 80s Sunday, but there are other forecasts for Baltimore. Winds may come in off the ocean and bring those temperatures down for areas in coastal cities. I think if that does happen, I think it's going to happen after Baltimore has already reached 80 degrees at least for Sunday. And then you have that front that is going to move through associated with this strong storm system up in the Dakotas, which might even, the barometric pressure of that storm might even drop below 29 at some point. So it's really strong. You have temperatures in the 80s for South Dakota on Friday within just a few miles of the area which is getting a foot of snow. And even the area getting a foot of snow in the Black Hills, maybe even more than a foot of snow for Saturday night and Sunday, even for that area, temperatures still reaching the 60s Friday afternoon. That place is jam-packed with snow. They have a snowpack already, a heavy snowpack all over the place over there, and it's really quite interesting. The whole situation that's going on in the Dakotas is as fascinating as can be as storm after storm affects that area. If you're living there, hopefully you love the snow, but if you don't realize it is April and things change just like that, and they are changing just like that. You have places which are just like that, going into the 60s, even though there's enormous amounts of snow on the ground. If it wasn't for the snow, those temperatures would be in the 80s. They would be in the 80s if it wasn't for the snow. It's the snow in a certain way. It's ruining the media headlines. The attractive media headlines is being ruined by the snow, because you can't say that in Rapid City, South Dakota, it's going to be warmer than Atlanta, Georgia, or, maybe Rapid City, maybe you could. But when you get into North Dakota, you can't do it. You're stuck with Nebraska. You have to go to North Platte, Nebraska to see those highs in the 90s, to have high confidence. A high confidence city with temperatures in the 90s, you have to stick with Nebraska. Sure, it might happen in South Dakota. If it wasn't for the snow, we would be going all the way to North Dakota. It would be a whole different story. Anyways, I leave you off with that. Just the remarkable dew points was the main point over here. We also reiterated the Yontif, the holiday warmth, the Shabbos warmth, or the weekend warmth that's going to be here in the Midwest, and then heading out to the East Coast. I wish everybody a good day.